I'm the one who did it. With my own 2 hands, I took that little plaster statue of Our Lady of Sorrows, the one my employer loved more than anything, and I shoved it deep into the kitchen trash. I buried it under soggy coffee grounds and limp banana peels, pushing it down until I felt a faint crack. It was a sound that should have horrified me, but in that moment it felt like a victory, a small ugly victory in a life that felt full of defeats. My name is Brenda, and I'm 62 years old. For more than half my life, for 35 years, I've been a housekeeper. I've cleaned the homes of people who have more than I could ever dream of, scrubbing their floors, washing their linens, and quietly tidying away the remnants of their easy, comfortable lives. I've seen it all, and I learned a long time ago to build a wall around my heart, to just do the work, collect my pay, and go home to my small, quiet apartment. Before I go any further into this confession, really, if this story already speaks to a part of you, or if you're just curious to see where a broken road like mine can lead, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like and click that notification bell so you don't miss how this all unfolds. And I'd really love to know where you're watching from. Go ahead and leave a comment with your city or state. It's a comfort somehow, knowing we're not all alone in our struggles, no matter how far apart we are. For the last 10 years, I've worked for Mrs. Eleanor Vance. She's a widow, living alone in a grand house overlooking the city, a place so full of polished wood and silent rooms that you could hear your own heart beating. Mrs. Vance was always kind, in a distant, polite sort of way. She'd ask about my day but wouldn't really wait for the answer. She was a good employer, fair and punctual with my pay. But there was a gulf between us as wide as the Grand Canyon, and at the center of that gulf, at the heart of her world, was her faith. It was a deep, unshakable Catholicism that I found irritating. It was a faith that seemed to fit so neatly into her perfect life, like another expensive piece of furniture. Her devotion was focused on that one small statue, Our Lady of Sorrows. It sat on the marble mantelpiece in her study, a small antique thing, no taller than my hand. The paint was slightly faded, but you could still see the 7 tiny silver-painted daggers piercing the Virgin's heart and the look of serene sadness on her face. Every single morning, without fail, Mrs. Vance would stand before that statue and pray for the soul of her late husband. I'd be dusting in the hallway or cleaning the nearby windows, and I'd watch her. I'd see her lips moving, her eyes closed, her whole being focused on this piece of plaster, and a bitter, simmering contempt would rise in my throat. Her faith felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, a comfort for someone who'd never been truly abandoned, not like I had. To me, that statue wasn't a symbol of divine suffering. It was a symbol of her hypocrisy. It was a good luck charm for a woman who had never known a day of real, grinding hardship. My prayer, screamed into a pillow in the dead of night years ago, had gone unanswered. Heaven had been silent for me. So what right did she have to its comfort? My anger wasn't loud. It was a quiet, slow-burning fire inside me. It showed itself in small ways. If she left a rosary on a side table, I'd tuck it away in a drawer where she'd have to search for it. When she'd talk about a sermon she'd heard, I'd just nod, my face a blank mask, while inside I was rolling my eyes, mocking her simple, childish beliefs. I saw her faith as a weakness, a crutch for people who couldn't face the world on their own 2 feet. I was strong. I had survived. I didn't need any plaster saints looking down on me with their painted-on pity. Then came that Tuesday. It was no different from any other day. The sun was streaming through the large study windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Mrs. Vance was out for her weekly bridge game. I had finished polishing the grand mahogany desk and turned my attention to the fireplace. And there she was, the statue, staring out with that same placid expression of sorrow, and something inside me just snapped. It wasn't one thing, it was everything. It was the 35 years of scrubbing other people's toilets, It was the unanswered prayers. It was the quiet loneliness of my apartment. It was the injustice of a world where a woman like her could have so much faith and a woman like me could have none. My hands weren't shaking with fear, but with a rage that felt ancient and powerful. I walked right over to that mantelpiece. I didn't hesitate. I snatched the statue from its velvet stand. The plaster felt cool and smooth in my palm. It was heavier than I expected. I didn't look at its face. I couldn't. I marched straight from the quiet sunlit study into the sterile brightness of the kitchen. I lifted the lid of the heavy-duty trash bin, the one for the day's garbage. The smell of coffee and old vegetables hit me, and without a second thought, I shoved the statue deep inside, pushing it down past a bag of potato peels and some leftover chicken bones. I felt the crack then, a small final sound muffled by the garbage. I put the lid back on, tied the bag with a vicious tug, and felt a wave of relief, a bitter, empty relief. I had silenced her. I had erased a symbol of what I saw as her privileged, hollow belief. To me, God was silent, and his mother was just a piece of painted plaster, and I had just put her exactly where she belonged. I thought that was the end of it. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea it was just the beginning. For a few days, life went on. A strange, tense quiet settled over the Vance house. Mrs. Vance was, as I'd expected, distraught. She searched everywhere, her movements frantic at first, then slow and defeated. She'd retrace her steps, her brow furrowed in concentration, murmuring to herself, "I just don't understand. I never move her. She's always right there." Her daughter, Sophia, a practical, no-nonsense woman in her 30s, tried to console her. "Mom, it's just a thing. We can buy another one." But Mrs. Vance would just shake her head, her eyes welling with tears. "It's not just a thing, Sophia. It was your father's. And I played my part. I feigned concern. I helped her look under cushions and behind curtains, my heart pounding a dull, guilty rhythm against my ribs. "I'm sure it will turn up, Mrs. Vance," I'd say, my voice smooth and reassuring, while inside, a nasty little part of me was pleased. I had wounded her in the one place she was vulnerable. I had proven that her precious faith couldn't even protect a little plaster doll. I went home each night feeling a strange mixture of power and emptiness. The victory I had felt in the kitchen had curdled into a sour, persistent unease. But I pushed it down, just like I had pushed the statue into the trash. I was fine. I was in control. That feeling lasted exactly 3 days. It was a Friday. I remember because I was doing the deep cleaning, the heavy work I saved for the end of the week. Mrs. Vance was out and the house was mine. I was in the grand foyer, mopping the black and white marble tiles. I was working backwards, the way I always did, the damp, lemony scent of the cleaner filling the air. I was tired, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had been my constant companion for years. I stepped back to admire the gleam of the wet floor, and my foot slipped. It wasn't a dramatic, flailing fall. It was a quick, brutal betrayal by my own body. One moment I was standing, the next my left ankle twisted with a sickening, audible snap, and the world tilted sideways. I came down hard, my hip and shoulder striking the marble with a force that knocked the wind right out of me. For a moment, I just lay there, stunned, staring at the ornate ceiling, the pain a distant, roaring star. Then it arrived, a white-hot, blinding agony that shot up from my ankle through my leg and seemed to set my entire nervous system on fire. I cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound that was swallowed by the vast, empty house. I tried to push myself up, but a wave of nausea and dizziness washed over me. The pain was an ocean, and I was drowning in it. I managed to drag myself a few feet, leaving a wet smear on the tiles, until I was slumped against the bottom of the grand staircase. And there I stayed. My phone was in my purse, in the kitchen, a world away. Mrs. Vance wouldn't be back for hours. I was utterly, completely alone. The silence I had so often craved in her house now felt menacing. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a countdown. Each tick was a hammer blow, marking another second of my helplessness. My self-reliance, the very core of my identity, the thing I was so proud of, had been shattered in an instant. I, who needed no one, now couldn't even get myself a glass of water. I, who scoffed at prayer, found myself staring at the dust bunnies under a gilded console table. My world reduced to a patch of dirty floor. Hours passed. The sun shifted, casting long distorted shadows across the foyer. The pain settled into a relentless, throbbing pulse. And in that enforced stillness, with nothing but the clock and my own ragged breathing for company, the walls I had built around my heart began to crumble. I thought about my life, the long, lonely years. I thought about the bitterness I carried like a shield. I had always believed my strength came from my refusal to believe in anything beyond myself. I was the captain of my own ship, a ship I had steered through storms of loss and disappointment. But now, shipwrecked on a marble floor, I saw the truth. My ship was a leaky raft, and I was going under. A desperate, primal fear began to claw its way up my throat. It wasn't just the fear of the pain or of being found like this. It was a deeper, more terrifying fear. It was the fear of dying alone in this silent, opulent house that was not my own. The fear that my entire life had amounted to nothing more than this. A broken woman, lying in a stranger's hallway, invisible and forgotten. In my desperation, I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. My mind, which had once been filled with the simple prayers of childhood, was a barren wasteland. I tried to call out to a god I had long since dismissed, but there was only silence. Not a peaceful, holy silence, but a dead, empty void. The same silence that had met my cries all those years ago. It was a confirmation of my deepest, most cynical belief. There was no one there, no one listening, no one who cared. The pride I had felt just days before, standing over that trash can, now seemed like the pathetic posturing of a fool. I had mocked a woman's faith in a loving, merciful mother, and here I was, abandoned and motherless myself, with nothing but a cold, hard floor to hold me. The fall had broken my ankle, but the silence, the profound and absolute emptiness that answered my desperate plea, that broke my soul. If you've ever felt that kind of bone-deep loneliness, that feeling of being completely and utterly on your own, then you know what I was going through. Let me know you're here with me on this journey by hitting that like button. And please, make sure you turn on all notifications, because you need to hear what happened when I was finally found. You won't believe it. I still barely do. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, a prisoner on an island of polished marble. The pain in my ankle was a living thing, a vicious animal with its teeth sunk into my bone. With every tick of that monstrous grandfather clock, a little more of my bravado drained away, replaced by the cold, clammy sweat of pure fear. The sun, my only companion, began its slow retreat, stretching the shadows of the furniture into long, distorted fingers that seemed to be reaching for me. I was no longer Brenda, the self-sufficient housekeeper. I was just a pile of pain and regret, shrinking into the floor, becoming as insignificant as the dust I was paid to wipe away. I closed my eyes, and the darkness behind my eyelids was no different from the dead silence in my soul. This is it, I thought. This is how it ends. Not with a bang, but with the lonely ticking of a rich woman's clock. And then, something shifted. It wasn't a sound. The clock still ticked. My own breathing was still a ragged, shallow thing. It was the quality of the silence that changed. The menacing emptiness was filled. I opened my eyes, expecting to see the deep gloom of twilight, but the foyer was bathed in a soft, gentle luminescence. It wasn't sunlight. It was too warm, too personal. It was a light that didn't seem to come from the windows, but from the very air itself, and it carried with it a profound, impossible peace. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, slowed to a steady, calm rhythm. The searing agony in my ankle didn't disappear, but it receded, as if wrapped in thick, soft cotton. It was still there, but it no longer had control of me. I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't see anyone. There was no shape or form, but I felt a presence so powerful and so real. It was like a pressure against my skin. It was a gaze. I was being looked at, seen in a way I had never been seen before. Not with the polite distance of Mrs. Vance or the casual indifference of the world, but with a gaze that went straight through the calloused layers of my anger and bitterness, past the pride and the pain, and into the broken, terrified core of who I was. And in that gaze, there was no judgment. There was no anger for what I had done. There was only sorrow, an immense, deep, and heartbreaking sorrow. It was a sorrow that felt ancient and bottomless, and yet it wasn't for itself. It was for me. It was a mother's sorrow for a lost and hurting child. In that moment, the image of the little plaster statue flooded my mind. The face I had refused to look at as I carried it to the trash. The serene sadness. The 7 daggers piercing its heart. I had always seen it as a symbol of a distant, divine suffering that had nothing to do with me. Now, in this impossible light, I understood. That sorrow wasn't a passive, painted-on expression. It was this active, overwhelming, all-encompassing compassion that was now washing over me. And with that understanding came a wave of shame so powerful it buckled me. My act of defiance, which had felt so potent and justified, was suddenly revealed for what it was. A petty, cruel, and childish tantrum. I had taken a symbol of a mother's love and buried it in filth. I had tried to smash the very thing that was now holding me in this unexplainable peace. Tears began to stream from my eyes, hot and unstoppable. But they weren't tears of self-pity or physical pain. They were tears of profound, gut-wrenching remorse. I sobbed into the cold marble, my whole body shaking with the force of it. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words cracking, swallowed by the still, luminous air. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't just apologizing for the statue. I was apologizing for the 35 years of bitterness, for the wall around my heart, for turning my back on a love I never believed I deserved. Was I hallucinating? Was it just the pain, the exhaustion, playing tricks on my mind?" The thought flickered, a last gasp of my old cynical self. But it was no good. A hallucination doesn't feel like this. A hallucination doesn't feel like a pardon. It doesn't leave you feeling clean. Just as the last of my sobs quieted, a new sound cut through the silence, sharp and shockingly real. A key turning in the front door lock. It sounded like a gunshot. The light, the presence, vanished in an instant, leaving me back in the graying twilight of the foyer, blinking, my face wet, my body aching. The door swung open, and there stood Mrs. Vance, her arms full of grocery bags. She stopped dead, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Me, a crumpled heap on her floor, the overturned mop bucket, the long wet smear on her perfect marble. For a split second, I saw her as I always had, the wealthy employer, the woman whose perfect house I had just defiled. I braced myself for the anger, the exasperation, the cold dismissal, but it never came. The bags of groceries dropped from her arms, oranges and a carton of milk rolling across the floor with a series of dull thuds. Her face wasn't angry. It was filled with a pure, unadulterated horror. "Brenda!" she cried out, her voice sharp with alarm. "Oh, my dear God, Brenda! What happened?" That moment, the look of genuine fear and concern on her face, it was the beginning of everything changing. If you're feeling the weight of this moment with me, just that small human connection that cut through everything, please show your support by hitting that like button. And make sure you're subscribed with all notifications turned on, because what she did next, and what was found in the city trash the very next morning, that's where the real miracle begins. You don't want to miss it. Mrs. Vance's kindness in the aftermath was in its own way, more unsettling than the fall itself. She didn't fire me. She didn't even scold me for my carelessness. She called her daughter, Sophia, who came and drove me to the emergency room. Mrs. Vance waited with me for 5 hours on a hard plastic chair until the doctors had set my ankle and wrapped it in a heavy, suffocating cast. She drove me home to my small apartment, helped me get settled on the sofa with a stack of pillows, and made me a cup of tea. Her concern was so genuine, so untainted by annoyance, that it felt like a hot coal pressed against my conscience. I was the one who had tried to hurt her, to break a piece of her heart, and here she was, tending to my broken body. In the days that followed, trapped in the quiet of my own 4 walls, my rational mind went to war. The experience in the foyer, it couldn't have been real. It was a textbook case of a trauma-induced hallucination. I had hit my head. I was in shock, dehydrated, my brain flooded with endorphins and adrenaline. The light was probably just the shifting sun hitting my optic nerve in a strange way. The presence was a psychological projection, my terrified mind inventing a comforting figure in a moment of extreme duress. I told myself this over and over again, reciting the logical explanations like a mantra. I had built my life on the solid ground of what I could see and touch. There was no room for ghosts or visions in the world of Brenda, the survivor. It was all just a trick of the light, a figment of a desperate imagination. But the memory wouldn't fade. It refused to be neatly filed away under hallucination. I could still feel it. I could lie on my sofa, the television murmuring in the background, and if I closed my eyes, I could summon the profound, impossible peace that had settled over me. I could feel the gaze that saw everything and condemned nothing. A hallucination is a phantom. This felt like the only real thing that had ever happened to me. And the sorrow, that mother's sorrow I had felt, it clung to me. It wasn't a sad feeling. It was a deep, resonant ache, a sense of a love so vast it had to express itself as grief for all the pain in the world. For my pain, if you've ever found yourself caught between what your head is telling you and what your heart knows to be true. If you've ever struggled with a moment that defied all logic, please let me know by hitting that like button. It helps to know I'm not the only one. And make sure you have that notification bell turned on, because this internal battle was just the beginning. Then the dreams started. They weren't frightening. They were quiet, and they were always the same. I was standing in a vast, dark space, and in the distance, there was a single point of light. As I walked toward it, I would see that the light was coming from a woman's hands. She was holding something, cupping it carefully. As I got closer, I could see what it was, the little plaster statue. It was whole, not a scratch on it. And she wasn't Mrs. Vance. I could never see her face clearly. It was always just out of focus. But I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than sight, who she was. She would simply look down at the statue in her hands, then look up at me, and the dream would end. I'd wake up with my heart pounding, the sheets damp with sweat, the feeling of that sorrowful, loving gaze still lingering in my room. After the 3rd night in a row, my logical explanations started to feel like thin, flimsy shields against a rising tide. With the dreams came the shame. It was a physical thing, a hot flush that would creep up my neck and burn my cheeks whenever I remembered what I had done. I'd be trying to eat my lunch, and suddenly the image of my hand, shoving that statue into the garbage, would flash in my mind. The casual cruelty of it, the arrogance. I remembered every sarcastic thought I'd ever had watching Mrs. Vance pray. I remembered hiding her rosary, a petty little act of spite that now seemed monstrous. I had mocked this woman's deepest comfort, sneered at her source of strength, all because my own heart was a barren field of stones. Who was I to judge her faith? I, who had nothing to believe in but my own stubborn pride, a pride that had been shattered on a marble floor. I would press my hands against my face, groaning aloud in the empty apartment. wishing I could somehow go back in time and snatch my own hand away from that mantelpiece. A week after my fall, Mrs. Vance came by with a bag of groceries. She bustled around my small kitchen putting things away, chattering about her garden. Before she left, she placed a small embroidered pouch on the end table next to my sofa. "I thought you might like some company," she said with a gentle smile, and then she was gone. I stared at the pouch for a long time. I knew what was inside. Cautiously, as if it might burn me, I reached out and untied the silk cord. Her rosary spilled into my palm. The beads were cool and smooth, made of some dark, polished wood. I had seen this thing 100 times, draped over a book or coiled on a nightstand. To me, it had been a silly, superstitious chain of beads. Now, it felt heavy. It felt like it held weight, a history of prayers and hopes whispered over decades. I ran my thumb over the small silver crucifix at the end. I had spent my life rejecting this symbol, seeing it as part of a story that had nothing to offer me. But now, all I could think of was the sorrow, the love that asks for nothing in return. My fingers closed around the beads, my knuckles white, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't mock. I didn't reject. I just held on. The battle in my mind was over. I had lost. And in that defeat, for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. News of what happened in the Vance house didn't exactly spread like wildfire. It was more like a slow, creeping smoke that seeps under doors and through cracks in the walls. It began with Sophia, Mrs. Vance's daughter. She was kind, but I could see the clinical concern in her eyes. She'd look at me, and I knew she wasn't seeing a woman who'd had a spiritual awakening. She was seeing a 62-year-old housekeeper who had a nasty fall, likely hit her head, and was now suffering from what she gently termed a stress-induced episode. She'd suggest I talk to a therapist, that trauma can do strange things to the mind. My own sister, who I hadn't spoken to in years but who heard the story through the family grapevine, called me. She didn't mince words. "Brenda, you've always been dramatic, but this is a whole new level. Are you on some new medication? You sound crazy." The few acquaintances I had from my old life, the other women who cleaned houses and rode the same early morning bus, they just looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The story became a piece of neighborhood gossip, warped and twisted with each telling. "Did you hear about Eleanor Vance's housekeeper? She's seeing things. Thinks statues are talking to her." The old me would have been furious. The old me would have built her walls higher, sharpened her tongue, and met their skepticism with a bitter, defensive rage. But I wasn't that person anymore. When they'd challenge me, when they'd offer their logical explanations of brain chemistry and trauma, I wouldn't argue. I'd just listen, nod, and when they were finished, I'd say, quietly but without a flicker of doubt, "I understand why you think that, but what I felt on that floor, it was the most real thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life." My certainty was a quiet, unshakable stone at the bottom of a river, and their doubts were just the current flowing harmlessly over it. They couldn't touch it. They couldn't move it, because they hadn't been there. They hadn't been held by that light. It was Mrs. Vance who opened the door to my new path. A few weeks after my cast came off, she asked if I would accompany her to a small weekday mass. I hesitated. A church was a place I had actively avoided for 40 years, a building I associated with hypocrisy and judgment. But looking into her kind, expectant eyes, I couldn't say no. Walking through those heavy oak doors was like stepping into another world. The air was cool and smelled of old wood and faint incense. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting the pews in jewel tones. And there they were, statues. Saints I didn't know, an angel with a sword, and in a small alcove, her, a statue of Mary, her hands open in a gesture of welcome. My heart didn't feel contempt. It felt a pang of recognition, like seeing the face of a long-lost mother. I sat in the back pew, and as the quiet ceremony unfolded, I didn't understand all the rituals, but I understood the peace. It was a shadow of the peace I had felt on the floor, but it was there. It was real. I began to go with her regularly, finding a strange comfort in the quiet community, in the shared belief that we were all just broken people in need of a grace we didn't deserve. My transformation culminated on a warm autumn evening at a parish potluck dinner held in the church basement. The room was filled with the clatter of plates, the laughter of children, and the smell of 100 different home-cooked meals. At one point, the priest invited anyone who felt moved to share a story of their faith journey. My heart began to pound. My hands grew clammy. This wasn't my world. These people with their easy faith and lifelong devotion, what would they think of me? But then I felt a gentle nudge, not from Mrs. Vance beside me, but from within. A quiet insistence. This is what you have to do. Shaking, I stood up and walked to the small microphone at the front of the room. The chatter died down as 100 faces turned to look at me. This unfamiliar woman with graying hair and a slight limp. I gripped the microphone stand, my knuckles white. "My name is Brenda," I began, my voice trembling. "And for most of my life, I hated everything this church stands for." A nervous murmur went through the crowd. "I thought faith was a crutch for the weak." I mocked people who prayed. "I saw your rosaries and your statues as idols, empty trinkets." I took a deep breath, and the next words came out in a raw, broken whisper. "A few months ago, I took a statue of Our Lady of Sorrows, a statue my employer cherished, and I threw it in the kitchen trash. I pushed it down into the garbage because I wanted to hurt her, and I wanted to prove that her God was powerless." I could feel the shock in the room, a palpable, heavy silence. I didn't dare look at Mrs. Vance. I was a woman full of pride and bitterness. I continued, tears now streaming down my face. And then I fell. I broke my ankle and I was left alone, helpless on a cold marble floor. In that darkness, in that complete abandonment, when my pride was shattered into 1,000,000 pieces, she came to me, the mother I had rejected. I didn't see her with my eyes, but I felt her. I felt her sorrow for me. I felt her love. It was a love that didn't care about the filth in my heart, any more than it cared about the filth in the trash can where I had thrown her image. It just wanted to lift me out. I finally looked up, my eyes finding Mrs. Vance's. She was weeping, a radiant smile on her face. The very thing I tried to destroy was the only thing that saved me. The one I rejected was the one who came looking for me. I am not here tonight because I suddenly became a good person. I'm here because I was shown a mercy. I did absolutely nothing to earn, and I want to publicly say I'm sorry. I am so sorry for the hatred I carried in my heart. I finished, and there was a moment of stunned silence, and then the room erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but a wave of genuine, heartfelt welcome. People I didn't know came up to hug me, to press my hand, their own eyes wet with tears. It wasn't about changing a religion. It was about my heart being completely rewritten. It was about the pride that had nearly destroyed me being washed away and replaced with a humility that felt, for the first time, like true strength. My rebellion had led me to a dead end. But faith had given me a new beginning. If my story, the story of a broken woman finding grace in the last place she ever thought to look, has moved you, if you believe in the power of a second chance, not just from others, but from God, please let this video be a sign for you. Show your support by giving it a like and click that notification bell so you don't miss any more stories of hope. And I truly want to know, what was the moment in your life where you felt a mercy you didn't expect? Share your story in the comments below. Let's fill this space not with judgment, but with the testimonies of how love can find us, even when we're lost in the dark.